Stopping giving a FCK does not mean becoming careless or arrogant. It means finally understanding where your energy is being wasted and refusing to spend it on things that were never under your control to begin with, because most people are not exhausted from work or responsibility. They are exhausted from caring too much about opinions that do not matter, outcomes they cannot dictate, and expectations that were never fair. And the Stoic sees this clearly and cuts the weight without apology, realizing that peace is not found by fixing the world, but by reducing unnecessary attachment to it. Because the moment you stop needing approval, criticism loses its power. The moment you stop craving validation, rejection becomes irrelevant. And the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, your mind becomes quiet and focused. And this focus is strength, not indifference. Because indifference is lazy, but discipline is intentional, and the Stoic is disciplined about where he places concern, choosing to care deeply about his actions, his character, and his effort, and to care not all about noise, gossip, comparison, and judgment, because those things add nothing and take everything. And once you internalize this distinction, life becomes lighter without becoming shallow, calmer without becoming passive, because you're no longer emotionally reacting to every comment, delay, or inconvenience. You are responding selectively, deliberately, and this selectiveness is what frees you, because caring less about what you cannot control gives you more capacity to master what you can. And over time, this creates a presence that is grounded, unmoved, and difficult to provoke, not because you are numb, but because you're no longer available for manipulation. And that is the real meaning of stopping giving a FCK, not the absence of values, but the ruthless protection of them, the decision to spend your limited attention only on what strengthens your character and moves your life forward, and to let everything else pass without negotiation, explanation, or emotional cost. Stopping giving a FCK also means recognizing that most of what drains you is optional, not forced, because you're not tired from doing too much. You are tired from thinking too much about things that do not deserve your attention, replaying conversations, imagining judgments, chasing explanations, and trying to manage perceptions you will never fully control. And the Stoic abandons this game completely, understanding that attention is life's most valuable currency, and wasting on noise is a form of self-betrayal, because every moment spent worrying about opinions is a moment stolen from effort, growth, and presence. And once you see this clearly, caring less stops feeling reckless and starts feeling responsible, because responsibility is not carrying everything, it is choosing correctly what to carry. And the Stoic chooses to carry only what strengthens him, his actions, his discipline, his integrity, and drops everything else without guilt, because guilt is often just fear disguised as morality, fear of being disliked, misunderstood, or judged, and the unshakable person accepts all three calmly, knowing that being misunderstood is cheaper than being distracted, and being judged is easier than being controlled. And this mindset creates a quiet separation between you and the world, not isolation, but clarity, the clarity to act without seeking permission, to fail without self-loathing, and to succeed without arrogance, because you are no longer emotionally invested in reactions, only in results aligned with your values. And over time, this emotional detachment becomes mental strength, because nothing weakens a person faster than over-identification with external feedback, and nothing strengthens them faster than indifference to it. And this indifference is not emptiness. It is focus, a narrowing of concern that sharpens. Execution reduces anxiety and restores energy, because when you stop giving an FCK about what does not matter, you suddenly have enough discipline to handle what does. And this is when life begins to feel manageable, not because it becomes easier, but because you're no longer fighting unnecessary battles in your own head. And the Stoic knows that the greatest freedom available is not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from pointless concern. And once you claim that freedom fully, you move through the world calm, deliberate, and difficult to disturb, because nothing rattles a person who has decided exactly what deserves his care and what does not. Stopping giving an FCK is the moment you reclaim authority over your own mind, when you realize that most people never had power over you. You handed it to them through attention, explanation, and emotional reaction. And once you take that power back, something irreversible happens. Your mind becomes quiet, your actions become precise, and your energy finally starts working for you instead of against you, because you are no longer living in response to the world, but in alignment with your values. And this alignment creates a calm that cannot be shaken by criticism or inflated by praise, since neither alters who you are or what you do. And the Stoic accepts this with clarity, understanding that life is too short and attention too limited to be wasted on noise, judgment, or expectations that were never yours to carry. And from this point on, you move differently. You speak less, explain less, react less, and act more, not because you're cold, but because you are free from the burden of unnecessary concern, free from a need to be understood, and free from the exhausting habit to care about things that do not build your character or move your life forward. And this freedom is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet and stable, a kind of inner independence that makes you difficult to provoke and impossible to control, because when you stop giving an FCK about what does not matter, you finally have enough discipline, focus, and strength to give everything to what does. Stop giving. AF*CK the moment you realize your attention is your life, and every opinion you chase steals it from you. Because peace is not found by being liked. It is found by being aligned. And once you stop explaining yourself, stop reacting to noise, and stop carrying expectations that were never yours, your mind becomes quiet, your actions become decisive, and your life finally starts moving forward, not because the world changed, but because you did. Stopping giving the F***CK is not rebellion, laziness, or arrogance. It is the moment you finally wake up to how much of your life has been silently stolen by caring about things that were never worth your attention. Because most people are not suffering from lack of ability, discipline, or intelligence. They are suffering from emotional overinvestment in opinions, reactions, expectations, and outcomes they cannot control. And the Stoic cuts this cord without apology, realizing that peace is not built by pleasing others, but by refusing to let external noise dictate internal order. Because every time you seek approval, you place your self-worth in unstable hands. And every time you fear judgment, you give strangers authority over your mood, your decisions, and your direction. And once you see this clearly, caring less does not feel irresponsible. It feels necessary. Because attention is finite and life is short, and wasting either on gossip, comparison, validation, or constant explanation is a form of self-neglect, and the Stoic refuses to neglect himself any longer, choosing instead to care deeply, but selectively about effort, character, and integrity, and to care not at all about whether his discipline is noticed, whether his silence is misunderstood, or whether his path makes sense to others. Because most people judge from comfort and speak from insecurity, and structure your life around their opinions is the fastest way to lose clarity, momentum, and self-respect. And this is why stopping giving AF**CK creates immediate mental space. Because when you stop reacting to everything, you regain energy, and energy redirected toward meaningful work compounds quietly, while energy wasted on emotional reaction disappears without return. And over time, this emotional detachment sharpens your focus, reduces anxiety, and restores authority over your own mind, because nothing weakens a person faster than needing reassurance. And nothing strengthens him faster than independence from it. And this independence is not coldness. It is clarity. The clarity to accept being disliked without self-doubt, to accept being misunderstood without correction, and to accept slow progress without panic. Because panic comes from attachment, and attachment creates fragility, and the Stoic trains himself to remain unattached to praise, criticism, success, and failure alike, not because these things do not exist, but because they do not deserve control over his behavior. And once you internalize this discipline, something fundamental changes. You speak less, react less, explain less, and act more, not because you are indifferent to life, but because you're finally engaged with the right parts of it. And this engagement produces a calm, grounded presence that others feel instinctively. because it is rare in a world addicted to reaction and reassurance. And over time, this calm becomes power. Not power over others, but power over impulses, fears, and distractions. And that power is what frees you, because when you stop giving **CK about what does not matter, you gain the capacity to give everything to what does: your work, your growth, your discipline, and your principles. And this is a real Stoic freedom, not escaping responsibility, but escaping pointless concern, not numbing emotion, but mastering it. And once you reach this point, life becomes lighter without becoming shallow, quieter without becoming empty, and clearer without becoming rigid, because you are no longer dragged by every external force. You are moving deliberately, aligned with values you chose consciously, and from that position, criticism loses its sting, validation loses its pull, and chaos loses its authority, because you're no longer available for manipulation, distraction, or emotional taxation. And that is what it truly means to stop giving **CK, not the absence of care, but the ruthless protection of it. Stopping giving **CK reaches its final form when you no longer need life to cooperate in order to remain composed, when praise no longer inflates you, criticism no longer wounds you, and silence no longer feels like rejection, because you have shifted your loyalty from the world to your own standards. And this shift is irreversible, since once you stop outsourcing your self-worth, nothing external can truly threaten you. And the Stoic understands that most people never gain this freedom, because they are addicted to reaction, addicted to explanation, and addicted to being seen, while the unshakable person becomes invisible to noise by choice, conserving attention for effort, discipline, and clarity. And this conservation changes everything, because energy saved from pointless concern becomes fuel for meaningful action, and meaningful action compounds into progress that does not require validation to continue. And over time, this creates a calm authority that others feel but cannot influence, because it does not ask for permission or recognition. It simply acts, and this action, repeated under pressure and without applause, builds a mind that cannot be hijacked by emotion or circumstance. And once you reach this state, life's chaos no longer feels personal. Delays no longer feel insulting, and setbacks no longer feel like judgments. They become conditions to navigate rather than verdicts to accept. And this perspective strips fear of its power, because fear depends on imagined consequences and fragile identity. And you have removed both, replacing them with discipline and self-command. And this is a quiet endgame of stopping giving **CK, not detachment from life, but dominance over distraction, not emotional numbness, but emotional independence. And from this position, you move forward unburdened, focused, and free, not because the world became easier, but because you finally stopped letting it control you. Stopping giving **CK is the point where excuses die and self-command begins, where you finally accept that nobody is coming to validate you, rescue you, or understand you fully. And instead of resenting this truth, you weaponize it, because dependence is weakness dressed as hope, and the Stoic burns a dependence without regret, realizing that the fastest way to lose power is to care about what people think who will never carry your consequences. And once this realization settles in, you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop negotiating with noise, because explanation is submission and reaction is permission, and you refuse both, choosing instead to live by standards that do not bend under pressure, boredom, or fear. And this makes you dangerous in a quiet way, because you're no longer predictable, no longer emotionally accessible, no longer manipulable through praise or blame. And while others exhaust themselves trying to be liked, you conserve energy by being aligned, understanding that alignment creates momentum while approval creates addiction, and addiction always ends in weakness. And this is why the Stoic does not seek comfort, because comfort dulls the edge, and does not seek reassurance, because reassurance creates dependence, and does not seek understanding, because understanding is optional but discipline is not. And as you stop giving **CK about opinions, you begin to see clearly how much of life is noise designed to pull you off course, distractions disguised as obligations, emotions disguised as emergencies, and once you stop responding to them, your life simplifies brutally. Not because problems disappear, but because you stop multiplying them with unnecessary concern. And this simplification creates clarity, and clarity creates speed, and speed applied consistently creates dominance, not over people, but over your own habits, impulses, and excuses. And that is the only dominance that matters. Because anyone can feel motivated, but very few can remain disciplined. When motivation is gone, and the Stoic prepares for that moment, building himself into someone who moves forward regardless of mood, praise, or resistance. And this movement becomes inevitable over time, because consistency compounds whether you feel like it or not. And once you reach this state, criticism becomes background noise, rejection becomes redirection, and silence becomes space to think, because you are no longer emotionally invested in outcomes you cannot control. Only an effort you can repeat, and effort repeated without emotional attachment becomes unstoppable. And this is the ruthless truth most people avoid. You do not need to care more to win. You need to care less about everything that weakens you, and more about the few things that sharpen you. And when you finally make that cut without guilt, apology, or hesitation, you become calm, efficient, and hard to disturb, because nothing is more dangerous than a person who has stopped giving CK about approval and started taking full responsibility for his life. Stopping giving CK reaches its sharpest edge when you realize that caring selectively is not cruelty, it is intelligence, because a mind that reacts to everything is a mind controlled by everything, and the Stoic refuses to live in reaction, choosing instead to operate from intention, knowing that most stress is self-created by treating trivial things as critical and critical things as optional. And once you reverse this pattern, life becomes simple without becoming easy, because you stop wasting emotional energy on delays, misunderstandings, and minor setbacks that do not threaten your character or direction, and you start investing that energy into execution, patience, and long-term discipline, which are boring, quiet, and effective. And this is exactly why most people avoid them, preferring emotional release over emotional control, venting over progress, and comfort over competence, while the Stoic does the opposite, accepting that frustration is part of the process, and silence is often the correct response, because not every thought deserves expression, and not every emotion deserves action, and learning this distinction is what separates maturity from immaturity, strength from sensitivity, and freedom from dependence, because dependence on external validation turns every interaction into a negotiation, every criticism into a wound, and every silence into a threat, while independence allows you to move through the same situations untouched, grounded, and deliberate. And over time, this emotional economy compounds. You become harder to provoke, harder to distract, and harder to derail, not because you're superior, but because you've removed unnecessary attachment. And attachment is where suffering multiplies, and once attachment is reduced, clarity increases. And clarity leads to better decisions, made calmly, consistently, and without urgency. And urgency is the enemy of wisdom, because urgent minds make expensive mistakes, while calm minds build durable lives. And the Stoic builds durability, not excitement, knowing that excitement fades, but discipline remains. And this discipline expresses itself as restraint, focus, and a refusal to explain oneself to those who are not invested in understanding. Because explanation drains power and invites debate where none is required. And when you stop giving CK about being perceived correctly, you gain the freedom to act correctly, which is infinitely more valuable. And from this position, life stops feeling overwhelming, not because challenges disappear, but because you're no longer fighting imaginary battles in your head. And this mental quiet allows you to endure longer, work deeper, and move forward steadily, while others burn out emotionally, restart repeatedly, and mistake motion for progress. And in the end, this is the quiet advantage of stopping giving CK. You stop leaking energy, you stop arguing with reality, and you stop allowing external noise to dictate internal order. And when internal order is established, progress becomes inevitable, not dramatic, not fast, but relentless. And nothing is more powerful than a person who is calm, focused, and no longer emotionally available for things that do not matter. The real meaning of stopping giving AF asterisk CK is not emotional numbness, but emotional authority, because authority begins the moment you decide that your inner state will no longer be hostage to other people's moods, opinions, delays, or approval. And this decision quietly changes everything, because now rejection feels like information, not injury. Criticism feels like data, not disrespect, and silence feels neutral instead of threatening. And this shift alone saves years of wasted mental energy that most people never even realize they are bleeding daily, worry about how they are perceived, misinterpreted, or judged as a perception were reality, when in truth perception is unstable, biased, and temporary, while character is consistent and long-lasting. And the Stoic invests in what lasts, not what fluctuates, which is why they stop explaining, stop defending, and stop reacting. Because reaction is surrender and explanation is insecurity. And when you stop reacting, you reclaim time, focus, and dignity. 3 resources that decide your future more than motivation ever will. And with this reclaimed energy, you begin to move differently, slower but sharper, quieter but stronger, because you're no longer trying to win arguments, prove worth, or seek permission. You're simply executing your responsibilities regardless of applause or resistance. And this makes you dangerous in the best way, because you become reliable to yourself, and self-trust is rare in a world addicted to comfort and distraction. And once self-trust is built, you stop negotiating with weakness, stop postponing discipline, and stop romanticizing struggle. Instead, treating progress as a non-negotiable daily standard, even when you feel uninspired, misunderstood, or ignored, because you understand that feelings are weather, not direction, and direction is chosen, not felt. And this is why stopping giving AF asterisk CK is liberating. It removes emotional drama from decision-making, allowing logic, values, and long-term thinking to lead. And over time, this creates emotional thickness, where insults bounce off, setbacks do not shake identity, and success does not inflate ego, because your sense of self is no longer outsourced to outcomes. And from this grounded state, life becomes less noisy, less personal, and more manageable, not because people change, but because you do. And when you change internally, the external world loses its power to disturb, manipulate, or control you. And this is a final reward. Not happiness, not excitement, but unshakable stability, where you move through chaos without absorbing it, focus on what matters, immune to what doesn't, and completely uninterested in anything that demands your peace as payment. Stopping giving AF asterisk CK becomes inevitable the moment you realize how little of your life is actually under your control and how much peace you've sacrificed pretending otherwise. Because most suffering does not come from reality itself, but from the constant demand that reality behave according to your expectations, your timelines, and your ego. And when it doesn't, frustration appears, anger rises, and anxiety settles in, not because life is cruel, but because you were entitled, and stoicism cuts entitlement at the root, reminding you that the world owes you nothing, not clarity, not fairness, not recognition, not closure. And once this truth is accepted without bitterness, something powerful happens. You stop arguing with life. You stop demanding explanations from people who cannot give them, and you stop waiting for conditions to be perfect before acting. And this acceptance is not weakness, it is strategic surrender, because energy wasted on resistance is energy stolen from progress. And the person who stops giving AF asterisk CK stops wasting energy on things they cannot command, and redirects it toward a few things they can: effort, response, discipline, and integrity. And this redirection is what separates the mentally free from the mentally enslaved, because slaves react while free people respond. Slaves obsess while free people observe. Slaves complain while free people adapt. And adaptation always outperforms outrage, especially over long periods of time. And this is why the Stoic does not chase peace through control, but through alignment. Alignment between values and actions, between intention and execution, between what is said and what is done. Because when your inner code is clear, the outside world loses its ability to confuse you. And confusion is where fear breeds, and fear is what keeps people obedient, distracted, and dependent on approval. But when you stop giving AF*CK, fear loses leverage. Because fear needs attachment to outcomes, and you have replaced attachment with commitment. Commitment to showing up daily regardless of mood, reward, or recognition. And this daily showing up, done quietly and consistently, forges a self-respect that no insult can touch and no failure can erase, because it is built on evidence, not opinion. And evidence compounds, unlike motivation, which fades, and as this self-respect grows, something else shrinks. The need to be understood, because you realize that understanding is rare, selective, and often irrelevant, and seeking it from everyone is a form of self-betrayal. So you stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided who you are. You stop justifying your pace to those who don't walk your path. And you stop shrinking your ambition to make others comfortable. Because comfort is not a moral obligation, and your life is not a group project. And this clarity simplifies everything. Fewer words, fewer reactions, fewer emotional spikes, and more action, more consistency, more quiet progress. And while others are busy narrating their struggles, you are building outcomes. While others are offended, you are focused. And while others wait for permission to become serious, you have already committed. And this commitment makes you dangerous to mediocrity. Because mediocrity survives on excuses, distractions, and emotional indulgence, all of which you have removed. And what remains is a clean, sharp mind that does not beg for motivation, does not panic under pressure, and does not crumble when unseen. And this is the real power of stopping giving AF*CK. Not rebellion, not arrogance, but ruthless prioritization of what actually moves your life forward, leaving everything else, including other people's opinions, exactly where they belong, outside your control, and outside your concerned at the end of this path. Stopping giving AF*CK no longer feels like a decision you make. It becomes who you are, because your nervous system has finally learned that chaos is normal, misunderstanding is common, and disappointment is survivable. And once this lesson is embodied, not just understood, the world loses its ability to shake you, because nothing outside of you is powerful enough to override the standards you live by. And these standards are no longer emotional promises, but behavioral laws you follow even when no one is watching. And this is where true freedom begins, because freedom is not the absence of pressure, but the ability to function under it without collapse. And while others spiral at the smallest inconvenience, you remain grounded, not because you're special, but because you train yourself to separate what happens from what matters. And this separation is the ultimate Stoic skill, because it prevents emotion from hijacking logic and ego from corrupting discipline. And when discipline leads, life becomes quieter, decisions become cleaner, and progress becomes inevitable, even if slow, because slow progress that is consistent always defeats intense effort that is emotional. And this is why you no longer chase intensity, validation, or inspiration. You build systems, routines, and principles that carry you forward regardless of how you feel, and feelings become background noise instead of steering wheels. And once this shift is complete, the need to prove anything disappears, because proof is to the insecure, and you have already proven yourself through consistency, through restraint, through showing up when it was boring, painful, and unrewarded. And this proof is internal, silent, and untransferable, which is why no insult can take it, and no praise can inflate it. And from this place you move differently. You speak less, react slower, and choose more carefully, because urgency is no longer controlling you, and the urgency to be seen, heard, and approved has been replaced by the discipline to act correctly regardless of outcome. And this discipline builds a kind of presence that cannot be faked, a presence rooted in self-command, where you're not trying to dominate others, only yourself. And this self-mastery is a final form of stopping giving AF*CK, because you're no longer at war with the world, no longer negotiating with weakness, and no longer asking permission to become serious. You simply move forward, detached from noise, anchored in values, and committed to a life that does not need applause to continue. And this is not arrogance, not coldness, and not indifference. This is clarity, this is strength, and this is what happens when a person finally decides that their peace, focus, and future are worth more than anyone else's opinion. Silence becomes power the moment you understand that most people talk not to communicate truth, but to release insecurity, justify weakness, and seek validation. And once you see this clearly, you stop feeling the urge to explain yourself, because explanation is often a sign that you are asking for permission to exist as you are, and the Stoic refuses this trade, choosing instead to let action speak slowly and unmistakably over time, because words can be argued with, twisted, or ignored, but consistent behavior under pressure cannot be denied, and this is why silence unsettles people. It removes their ability to control the narrative, provoke reaction, or extract emotional energy. And when you no longer react immediately, when you pause instead of defend, observe instead of interrupt, and choose restraint instead of expression, you gain leverage, because leverage comes from asymmetry, and nothing is more asymmetrical than calm against chaos, composure against provocation, and patience against urgency. And this calm is not passive, it is loaded, because behind silence lives clarity, and behind clarity lives precision. And the Stoic understand that every unnecessary word is a leak of power, every impulsive reaction is a surrender of control, and every attempt to be understood by everyone is a dilution of self-respect. So they speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they're selective about where their energy lands. And this selectivity sharpens presence, making each word heavier, each decision cleaner, and each move harder to misinterpret. And over time, people begin to feel this weight, even if they cannot explain it, because silence creates space, and space creates authority, and authority does not announce itself. It is felt, and this feeling changes how others treat you, not through fear, but through respect rooted in consistency. And as this respect grows, the need to prove anything disappears, because proof is external and fragile, while silence-backed discipline is internal and stable, and this stability allows you to endure misunderstanding without panic, delay without frustration, and solitude without loneliness, because you're no longer dependent on noise to feel real, and this independence is rare, because most people fear silence. It confronts them with themselves, but the Stoic welcomes it, using silence as a mirror, a filter, and a weapon of focus, cutting away distraction, drama, and ego until only what matters remains. And when only what matters remains, progress accelerates quietly, without announcement, without applause, and without permission. And this is the true power of silence. Not absence of voice, but mastery over impulse. Not withdrawal from the world, but control within it. And once you master this, you no longer need to win arguments, dominate conversations, or explain your path, because your life itself becomes a statement. And it says everything that needs to be said without making a sound. The loneliness of growth is not a phase you escape. It is a condition you accept. Because the moment you choose discipline over comfort, clarity over conformity, and long-term vision over short-term pleasure, you automatically step away from the crowd. And this distance is what most people mislabel as loneliness, when in reality it is separation from noise, distraction, and emotional dependency. And the Stoic understands that growth has a cost, and that cost is fewer conversations, fewer companions, and fewer places where you feel immediately understood. Because most people bond over habits, not values. And when your habits change, those bonds weaken, not out of malice, but incompatibility. And this realization can sting if you're still attached to belonging. But once you accept it fully, loneliness transforms from punishment into protection, because it shields your focus, sharpens your thinking, and forces you to confront yourself without escape and self. Confrontation is where real progress begins, because without external validation, distraction, or reassurance, you're left with only one question. Will you still show up when no one is watching, no one is encouraging, and no one is impressed? And this question separates the serious from the curious, because many want results of growth, but very few are willing to endure the quiet, repetitive, and isolating process required to earn them. And this is why most people return to the crowd. Not because the crowd is right, but because it is comfortable. While the Stoic remains alone long enough to build self-trust, and self-trust is forged only through consistency and solitude, through keeping promises to yourself when breaking them would be easy and unnoticed. And over time, this consistency creates an inner stability that companionship cannot provide, because it is not borrowed from others. It is built internally. And once this stability exists, loneliness loses its emotional charge, because you are no longer alone with doubt. You are alone with direction. And direction makes solitude purposeful, not empty. And from this place you begin to move with quiet certainty, no longer rushing to be understood, accepted, or included, because you understand that inclusion often comes at the price of dilution, and you are no longer willing to dilute your standards for temporary connection. And this does not make you cold, it makes you selective, because you now choose quality over quantity, alignment over familiarity, and depth over noise. And as you continue forward, people may misunderstand your silence, mislabel your distance, or question your priorities, but none of that matters, because growth does not require consensus. It requires commitment, and commitment is often lonely, but it is also powerful, because it builds a version of you that does not crumble in isolation, panic without support, or lose direction without approval. And when you finally reconnect with others, it is no longer out of need, but choice, no longer fill a void, but to share strength. And this is a final truth of growth. The loneliness you endure today becomes the inner peace you carry tomorrow. And that peace is worth every quiet night, every misunderstood decision, and every step taken alone.